My father died on a Monday morning in March. By Wednesday afternoon, my brother Raymond had forged my signature on 4 documents and transferred our father's company into his name. I know the exact timeline because Agent Diane Foster of the Internal Revenue Service told it to me, piece by piece, sitting across from me in a conference room in the Federal Building in Charlotte on a Thursday morning 3 weeks later, with a file folder on the table between us that had my name on the tab. Dorothy Collins, the tab said. Not Raymond's name. Mine. Agent Foster slid the folder toward me. Inside was a document I had submitted 3 years earlier, a voluntary disclosure to the IRS regarding certain accounting irregularities I had identified in Collins Construction's financial records. Irregularities I had reported not to expose my father, who had not created them and had not known about them. But because I was a certified accountant and I had discovered something in the books that required reporting, and I had done what a certified accountant does when she discovers something that requires reporting, I had reported it, and the IRS had opened a file, and that file had my name on it as the disclosing party. And when Raymond Collins forged my signature and transferred Collins Construction into his name on a Wednesday afternoon while our father had been in the ground for 48 hours, he had done something that he did not understand the full implications of. He had taken ownership of a company that was under active IRS review, with my name attached to the disclosure, which meant that the moment Raymond's name appeared on those documents, Agent Foster's office received a notification, which meant that Agent Foster had called me, which meant that I was sitting in this conference room on a Thursday morning with a file folder on the table between us. And Raymond Collins, who had spent 70 years believing that the important decisions in the Collins family were his to make, was about to discover that the most important decision in this particular situation had been made 3 years ago by the sister he had spent a lifetime underestimating. Agent Foster looked at me across the table. "Mrs. Collins," she said, "I think we need to talk about your brother." I folded my hands on the table. "I think so too," I said. "Before I tell you what Agent Foster had in that file and what it meant for Raymond, I need to ask you something. If you discovered that your brother had forged your signature on legal documents within 48 hours of your father's funeral, that he had transferred a 40-year-old family business into his name using your forged name while you were still in your grief, what would you do? Would you call the police immediately? Hire an attorney and fight it through the courts? Confront Raymond directly? Or would you sit down across from an IRS agent on a Thursday morning with your hands folded and the particular calm of a woman who filed a voluntary disclosure 3 years ago and has been waiting, without knowing exactly what she was waiting for the moment when that disclosure would become the most important thing she had ever done? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. And if this story is already finding something in you, if you have ever been the sibling who did the work and was overlooked for it, the one who followed the rules while someone else bent them, please like this video and subscribe to Still Waters. New stories arrive here regularly, and every one of them runs deeper than you expect. Where are you watching from right now? And what time is it there? Let me take you back to the beginning. Because the file that Agent Foster had on that table didn't start with Raymond's forgery. It started 40 years earlier, in a construction yard in Charlotte, North Carolina, where a man named Earl Collins was building something with his hands that his children would spend the rest of their lives understanding the value of, and only one of them would actually protect. My name is Dorothy Mae Collins. I was born in 1957 in Charlotte, North Carolina, the second of 2 children born to Earl and Mae Collins in a house on the west side of the city that Earl had built himself, not metaphorically, not as a figure of speech, but literally, with his own hands on weekends over the course of 2 years while he worked a day job at a construction company and saved money and taught himself. From books and from watching more experienced men and from the particular stubbornness of someone who has decided that a thing is going to happen and has organized his entire life around making it happen. Earl Collins was that kind of man. He started Collins Construction in 1975 with 2 employees, a used truck, and a reputation for doing exactly what he said he would do on exactly the schedule he said he would do it. A reputation built one project at a time, one client at a time, in the particular way that reputations are built by people who understand that the work itself is the advertisement. By 1985 he had 20 employees. By 1995, he had 40 in a commercial division that handled contracts the original Earl Collins of 1975 would not have believed were possible. By the time I joined the company as its full-time accountant in 2000, Collins Construction was a 40-person operation with annual revenues that required careful, professional management, the kind that Earl, who was extraordinary at building things and considerably less extraordinary at the financial architecture of a growing business, had been managing with a combination of instinct and the part-time help of a bookkeeper who was competent but not quite sufficient for what the company had become. I was sufficient. I had spent 20 years building a career in accounting, first at a firm in Charlotte, then at a larger one in Raleigh, then back in Charlotte when my husband Walter became ill and I needed to be closer to home. I had my CPA license and 15 years of experience and the particular understanding of construction company finances that comes from having grown up in a family where construction was the vocabulary of daily life. I understood what Earl had built. Not just financially, though I understood that too, with the professional precision of someone whose job it is to understand it, but in the deeper sense, the meaning of it. The 40 years of showing up and doing what you said you would do. The particular pride of a man who had started with 2 employees and a used truck and had built something that employed 40 people and had a reputation that preceded it into every room it entered. I understood what Collins Construction meant. Raymond did not. Raymond was 3 years older than me, 70 to my 67, and had spent his adult life in the particular way of someone who has always understood that there is a family asset he is connected to without ever fully understanding that connection requires contribution. He had worked at Collins Construction briefly, in his 20s. Earl had given him a supervisory role that Raymond had occupied for 2 years before the particular friction between his understanding of his authority and the reality of what the work required produced a departure that was mutual in the way that departures are mutual when one party has run out of patience and the other has run out of excuses. Raymond left. He went into sales, then insurance. Then a series of other things that he described with the enthusiasm of someone who finds the idea of work more engaging than the practice of it. He was not a bad man. I want to say that because it matters to the story and because it is true. Raymond Collins was not malicious in the way that malice requires intention toward harm. He was a man who had organized his understanding of his own life around the belief that certain things were owed to him by virtue of his birth order, his gender, his status as the eldest son of Earl Collins, and who had never been required, in any serious way, to examine that belief. He had been allowed to hold it by Earl, who loved Raymond with the particular love of a father who sees in his son both what the son is and what the father hoped he would become, and who could not bring himself to fully separate those 2 things even when the evidence required it. By our mother May, who had the wisdom to see Raymond clearly and the temperament to avoid confrontations that she believed would cost more than they resolved. And by me, by Dorothy, who had watched Raymond's belief in his own entitlement for 67 years and had said, in the spaces where saying something might have mattered, very little. Not because I was afraid of Raymond, because I was focused on the work, on the books, on the 40 employees and the annual revenues and the financial architecture of a company that my father had built with his hands and that I had spent 20 years helping him understand and protect. That was the work. Raymond was not the work. And so I focused on the work until the irregularities appeared. I need to tell you about the irregularities, not because they are the most dramatic part of the story, they are not, but because they are the hinge, the thing that looks from the outside like an accounting detail, and that turns out to be the thing everything else turns on. I discovered them in 2021. A pattern in the company's financial records, specific, consistent, the kind of pattern that does not appear by accident and that, once you have seen it, you cannot unsee. Payments to vendors that did not exist. Expense claims that did not correspond to documented work. A series of transactions over approximately 18 months that amounted, in total, to a sum that was significant enough to require reporting but not so large that it had triggered automatic flags in the standard audit processes. I found it because I was thorough. Because 20 years of working with these books had given me the particular familiarity with their patterns that allows you to notice when something has changed, not because a number is obviously wrong, but because it feels wrong in the specific way that things feel wrong when you know the territory they are disrupting. I found it in June of 2021. I spent 3 weeks verifying what I had found before I told anyone. Then I told Earl. Earl, who was 85 at the time and in the early stages of the health decline that would take him 18 months later, listened to everything I showed him with the particular attention of a man who has been presented with information he does not want to be true and who is determining whether the evidence is sufficient to require him to accept it. The evidence was sufficient. "Who did this?" he asked. "I don't know," I said. "I know what was done. I don't know who did it." All was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "What do we need to do?" I told him the correct course of action, the legally required course of action, as a CPA was to make a voluntary disclosure to the IRS, to report what I had found, provide the documentation, cooperate fully with whatever review followed. Earl looked at me. "Will it hurt the company?" he asked. "It will complicate things," I said honestly, "but the company is clean. What I found is isolated to these transactions. The disclosure protects you. It establishes that you reported it when you found it, which is the most important thing you can do." All nodded slowly. "Do what needs to be done," he said. I did what needed to be done. I filed the voluntary disclosure in August of 2021. The IRS opened a file. The file had my name on the tab. Dorothy Collins. Disclosing party. I did not tell Raymond. Not because I was hiding it from him. Raymond had no role in the company, no standing in its financial affairs, no reason to be informed of internal accounting decisions. But also, I will be honest, because there was something in the particular quality of my brother's relationship to Collins Construction, the way he referenced it in conversation, the casual proprietary ease with which he discussed a company he had left 48 years earlier, that told me, with the professional instinct of an accountant who has spent 35 years reading situations, that Raymond's understanding of what he was owed by the Collins family had not diminished with time. It had grown. And a voluntary IRS disclosure was not information I was going to give to a man whose sense of entitlement to the company had been growing quietly for 48 years. So I said nothing. And the file sat in the IRS system with my name on the tab. And Earl declined. And in March of the following year, on a Monday morning, he died. And on Wednesday afternoon, Raymond forged my signature on for documents. And on Thursday morning, Agent Foster called. Agent Foster had been assigned to Collins Construction's file 18 months earlier, when the voluntary disclosure had been reviewed and a determination made that the irregularities warranted an active investigation. She was a careful woman. I understood this immediately from the way she organized information, the way she asked questions, the way she listened to answers with the focused attention of someone who is building a picture from evidence rather than confirming a conclusion she has already reached. She had been building her picture for 18 months when Raymond Collins's name appeared on the company's ownership documents. It appeared in a way that triggered an alert. Not because of the forgery. She didn't know about the forgery yet. Not on Thursday morning. Not when she first called. The alert was triggered because a change of ownership in a company under active IRS investigation requires notification, and Raymond's filing had produced that notification automatically. She had called me because I was the disclosing party. Because my name was on the tab. "Dorothy," she said that morning when I answered, "we had spoken enough times over the previous 18 months that we had arrived at first names. The particular informality of a professional relationship that has lasted long enough to become something more like a working partnership. Have you authorized a transfer of ownership in Collins Construction?" I had not been expecting the call. I had been at my kitchen table in Charlotte with my coffee and the grief of 3 weeks since Earl's funeral and the particular fog that grief produces in the ordinary hours of ordinary days. "No," I said. She was quiet for a moment. "Are you aware," she said carefully, "that a filing was made 2 days ago transferring ownership of Collins Construction to a Raymond Collins?" The fog lifted. Not dramatically, just lifted. The way fog lifts when something specific requires your full attention and your full attention arrives. "I was not aware of that," I said. "Dorothy," she said, I need you to come in. I was there at 9 the following morning. The conference room in the federal building was on the 14th floor with windows that looked out over Charlotte in the March morning light. Agent Foster was already there when I arrived. Coffee, folders, the organized efficiency of a woman who had been doing this work for 20 years and who understood that the way you set up a room communicated something about the seriousness of what you were about to discuss. She slid the folder across the table. I looked at the tab. Dorothy Collins. I opened it. Inside was the voluntary disclosure I had filed 18 months earlier, the supporting documentation, the timeline of the investigation, and clipped to the front, a copy of the ownership transfer filing that Raymond had submitted 2 days after Earl's funeral. 4 documents, my signature on each one. I looked at my signature. I had been a certified accountant for 35 years. I had signed my name on tens of thousands of documents. I knew my own signature with the particular intimacy of someone for whom a signature is a professional instrument as much as a personal one. These were not my signatures. They were close. Whoever had produced them had access to documents bearing my actual signature and had copied them with the care of someone who understood that a casual forgery would not survive scrutiny. But they were not mine. The particular angle of the D, the way I crossed the T in Collins, the pressure variation that a copied signature cannot replicate because it is produced by a different hand with a different history. Not mine. Agent Foster was watching me. Those are not your signatures, she said. It was not a question. No, I said. She nodded. I need to tell you something, she said, about the investigation. Tell me, I said. The irregularities you disclosed 18 months ago, she said. We've been working through the documentation. She paused. We have a strong indication of who was responsible. I looked at her. We believe, she said carefully, that the transactions were conducted by someone with periodic access to the company's accounts, someone who was not a regular employee but who had occasion, over a period of approximately 2 years, to interact with the financial systems in ways that left traces. I sat very still. She continued, we have records of access from an IP address that we've been able to trace to a device registered to a Raymond Collins. The room was very quiet. I processed that sentence with the particular care of an accountant receiving information that reorganizes a significant portion of what she believed she understood about a situation. Raymond, I said, was responsible for the original irregularities, Agent Foster confirmed, and it appears, based on the timing and the forged documents, that when your father died he moved quickly to take ownership of the company before the investigation reached its conclusion. Because, I said slowly, if he owned the company he would have a different legal standing in the investigation, she said. Yes. I sat back in my chair. He had been planning this, I said. Not necessarily consciously, Agent Foster said. Or not entirely. But the timing suggests that the ownership transfer was not impulsive. I thought about Raymond at Earl's funeral. The way he had stood at the graveside with the composed grief of a man performing an emotion that coexisted with something else, something I had noticed and not yet understood. The way he had stayed after the reception when most people had left. The calls he had made on his phone in the parking lot. The timing. 48 hours. He had moved in 48 hours. Dorothy, Agent Foster said. I looked at her. I want to explain something about your situation, she said. The voluntary disclosure you filed 18 months ago is significant, not just for the investigation for you personally. It establishes clearly and on the record that you were not party to the original irregularities, that you discovered them and reported them. Yes, I said. Which means, she said, that your name on those forged documents creates a very specific legal problem for whoever forged them. I understand, I said. She looked at me steadily. Do you have an attorney? She asked. I have one, I said. Miss Clara Webb. She's been my attorney for 15 years. Good, Agent Foster said. I'd suggest calling her today. I already plan to, I said. Agent Foster nodded. Then she said something that I have thought about many times since. Dorothy, she said, in 20 years of this work, I have seen a great many situations where someone did the right thing and it didn't help them, where reporting something correctly produced no protection. I looked at her. This, she said, is not one of those situations. What you did 3 years ago, the disclosure, the documentation, the cooperation, it is the reason we are sitting here on your side of this conversation rather than the other side. I held her gaze. I did what a CPA is required to do, I said. Yes, she said, but she did it when it would have been easy not to. When not doing it would have been simpler and less disruptive and nobody would have known. I thought about Earl at 85, sitting across from me with the evidence of the irregularities on the table between us. Do what needs to be done, he had said. I did what needed to be done, I said. Agent Foster nodded. That, she said, is why we're going to be able to help you. Miss Clara Webb was exactly the kind of attorney you want when something serious has happened and you need someone who will look at the situation with complete clarity and tell you exactly what you have and exactly what to do with it. She was 62, with close-cropped natural hair going silver at the temples and reading glasses she wore on a chain, and the particular directness of a woman who had spent 30 years in law and had long ago stopped softening things that didn't benefit from being softened. I called her from the parking lot of the federal building. She was in her office in 45 minutes. I told her everything. She listened without interrupting. The particular quality of listening she had that I had come to understand was not passivity but its opposite, the active assembly of a legal picture from the information being provided, each piece placed in relation to the others with the efficiency of someone who does this for a living. When I finished, she said, "Let me see the documents." I showed her the copies Agent Foster had provided. She looked at them for several minutes. Then she set them down. "Dorothy," she said, "your brother has committed multiple felonies." "I know," I said. "Document fraud, forgery, fraudulent transfer of ownership. And if Agent Foster's investigation establishes what it sounds like it's going to establish," she paused, "potentially wire fraud in connection with the original financial irregularities." "I know," I said. She looked at me. "What do you want to do?" she asked. I thought about that question. I thought about Earl building the house on the west side of Charlotte with his own hands. About Collins Construction with its 40 employees and its 40-year reputation. About the voluntary disclosure and the file with my name on the tab and Agent Foster's 20 years of this work and the particular expression on her face when she said that this was not one of those situations. "I want the company back," I said, "in the correct legal standing. And I want Raymond to understand what he did." Clara nodded. "In that order?" she asked. "In that order," I said. Clara opened her notepad. "Then let's start with the company." She filed an emergency motion to freeze the ownership transfer the following morning. The motion cited the forged documents, the active IRS investigation, and the fraudulent nature of the transfer. It was supported by Agent Foster's office, which provided a formal statement regarding the investigation and the relevance of the ownership documents to it. The freeze was granted within 48 hours. Raymond's attorney called Clara's office the afternoon the freeze order was served. The call was brief. Clara relayed it to me that evening. "He wants to meet," she said. "Of course he does," I said. We met the following Thursday. In Clara's conference room, her territory, which was deliberate, the particular advantage of choosing the space when the choice is available. Raymond arrived with his attorney, a man named Bridges who had the practiced composure of someone managing a situation he understood was not going well. Raymond looked older than the last time I had seen him, which had been at Earl's funeral. The particular compression of a man who has been holding something and is beginning to understand that holding it is no longer an option. He looked at me when he came in. I looked at him. "Dorothy," he said. "Raymond," I said. We sat down. Bridges spoke first, which was the correct move. Raymond speaking first would have required him to produce a version of events before he understood what version I had, which was information he needed, and I was not going to give him freely. Bridges said, "We believe there may have been a misunderstanding regarding the ownership documents." Clara said, "There was no misunderstanding. The signatures on those documents are forged." Bridges said, "My client was working from documents he believed were properly executed." Clara said, "Your client's beliefs about the documents are not relevant to the forensic analysis of the signatures." A silence. I watched Raymond during this exchange. He was watching the table. Not because he was ashamed. I don't think Raymond had arrived at shame yet. Not in those first days. He was watching the table because he was calculating. Still calculating. The particular calculation of a man who has built his entire adult life on the belief that things can be managed and who is trying to determine whether this particular thing can still be managed. It couldn't. And I think he was beginning to understand that. "Raymond," I said. He looked up. "I want you to understand something," I said. "Not legally. Clara will handle the legal dimensions. But I want you to understand it personally. Because I think you need to. He waited. 3 years ago, I said, I found irregularities in Dad's books. Patterns in the financial records that didn't belong there. I spent 3 weeks verifying what I had found and then I reported them to the IRS. Raymond's expression shifted slightly. I reported them, I continued, because that is what a certified accountant is required to do and because the company that Dad spent 40 years building deserved to be protected by someone who understood what protection actually requires. I looked at him steadily. When I filed that disclosure, I said, I didn't know it was you. I found the pattern. I reported the pattern. And the IRS opened a file with my name on it as the disclosing party. Raymond was very still. When you forged my signature and transferred the company, I said, you triggered an alert in that investigation. Agent Foster called me. And when she called me, I went in. And when I went in, she told me what the investigation had established about who was responsible for the original irregularities. The room was completely quiet. Raymond, I said, you didn't just forge my name on transfer documents. You forged my name on documents connected to a company that I had reported to the IRS 3 years ago. And the IRS knew, before you filed a single paper, that you were the person I had reported. Raymond looked at his attorney. Bridges was looking at his notepad. This is why I said, there is no version of this situation that can be managed. This is not a family dispute about an inheritance. This is a federal investigation into financial fraud to which you have now added document forgery and fraudulent ownership transfer. Those are not things that get managed. Those are things that get prosecuted. Raymond said nothing for a long moment. Then he said something I had not expected. Did Dad know? He asked. About the IRS? Yes, I said. I told him everything. He told me to do what needed to be done. Raymond closed his eyes. Just briefly. Just for a second. Then he opened them. And in his expression, beneath the calculation that had been there since he walked in, beneath the composure that Bridges had prepared him to maintain, I saw something that was not shame but was adjacent to it. The particular expression of a man who has just understood that his father knew, that his father had been told, that his father had said do what needs to be done, and that what needed to be done had been done in a way that Raymond had not anticipated and could not now undo. All new, Raymond said. All new, I confirmed. And Raymond stopped. He still left the company to both of us, I said. Equally. In his will. Which you would have known if you had waited for the will to be read instead of forging documents 48 hours after the funeral. Raymond looked at the table. Bridges said something quietly to him. Raymond nodded without looking up. Then he looked at me. What do you want? He asked. I want the company returned to its correct legal standing, I said. I want the forged documents invalidated. And I want you to cooperate fully with Agent Foster's investigation, because that cooperation is the difference between this being the worst thing that happens to you and being considerably worse than that. Raymond was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, and if I do all of that? I looked at him. I have no interest in destroying you, Raymond, I said. I have interest in protecting what Dad built. Those are not the same thing. If you cooperate, that cooperation will be noted. What comes after that is between you and the federal government. He nodded, slowly. Once, Bridges began writing, and the meeting that Raymond had walked into still calculating whether there was a position to adapt to ended with him understanding, finally, that there was not. There was only the truth, written down, 3 years earlier. With my name on the tab. The legal process took 8 months. That is not a short time, but it is, Miss Clara assured me, a relatively efficient resolution for a matter of this complexity, which was a testament to the quality of Agent Foster's documentation and the cooperation agreement that Raymond's attorney negotiated on his behalf. Raymond cooperated. Fully and correctly, according to Agent Foster, which she communicated to me with the professional satisfaction of someone whose investigation had produced the outcome that correct investigations are supposed to produce. The forged documents were invalidated. Colin's construction was returned to its correct legal standing under the terms of Earl's will, which, as I had told Raymond in Clara's conference room, left the company equally to both of us. Equally. Old Collins, who had built the company with 2 employees and a used truck and 40 years of doing what he said he would do, had not chosen between his children in his will. He had given each of them half. with the provision which Clara had flagged when she reviewed the will and which I had read and understood that any transfer of ownership or major business decision required both parties' agreement. He had known what Raymond was. He had known what I was. And he had structured the inheritance in a way that required us to work together, or not at all the particular wisdom of a man who understood his children better than they understood themselves, and who had, in the document that would outlast him, done what he could to make the understanding unavoidable. Raymond did not contest the will. I think he understood by then that contesting anything was not the position he was in. The cooperation agreement required him to make restitution for the original financial irregularities, the money that had been taken from the company over those 18 months, which was returned to the company accounts with the particular clarity of a transaction that has been documented and verified and cannot be argued with. He also paid legal fees, his own and, by the terms of the agreement, a portion of mine. Clara was pleased with the agreement. I was something more complicated than pleased. Raymond called me 4 months after the cooperation agreement was signed. He called on a Sunday morning, which was when Earl used to call a pattern I had not connected until I heard Raymond's voice on a Sunday and felt the particular weight of the association. "Dorothy," he said. "Raymond," I said. He was quiet for a moment. "I want to say something," he said, "and I want you to know that I'm not saying it because my lawyer told me to." He paused. "My lawyer actually told me not to call." I waited. "I'm sorry," he said. "Not for getting caught. For what I did. The distinction mattered." "I know," I said. "I've been thinking about Dad," he said. "About what you said? That he knew about the IRS and he told you to do what needed to be done." "Yes," I said. "I keep thinking about why he didn't tell me," Raymond said. "Why he didn't come to me and say he stopped. Why he called you." I thought about the honest answer. "Because," I said, "the company was your inheritance, but it was my work. For 20 years I was there every day. I understood the books. I understood the risks. I understood what protecting it required." Raymond was quiet. "He trusted me with it," I said. "Not because he loved me more. Because I was the one who had shown him, over 20 years, that I understood what it meant." Another silence. Then Raymond said, "I never did that." "No," I said. He was quiet for a long time. Then, "Is there anything," he stopped, "is there any version of this where I'm involved in the company going forward?" I thought about that. About Collins Construction. About the 40 employees. About the 40 years. About Earl's will and what it had required and what that requirement meant. "I don't know yet," I said honestly. "That depends on what you do with what comes next." Raymond nodded. I could hear it. "Fair," he said. "Yes," I said. "It is." The first board meeting of Collins Construction following the restoration of the estate was in November. I ran it, not because I had staged a coup or because I had any interest in unilateral control. Earl's will had been clear about equal ownership, and I had no intention of circumventing what Earl intended. But because I was the CPA, because I had been running the financial side of this company for 20 years. Because the 40 employees who came to work every day at Collins Construction needed someone who understood the business to be at the table making the decisions. Raymond attended. He sat at the far end of the conference table with the expression of a man who is present as a requirement rather than a contributor, which was, I thought, looking at him across the table, an accurate description of where he was and perhaps a beginning. We went through the financial reports, the operational summary, the forward plan for the following year. Raymond listened. He asked one question about a supplier contract, a detail in the numbers that he had noticed, and that was, I had to acknowledge, a legitimate observation that required a response. I gave him the response. He nodded, and in that small exchange in the question and the answer, in Raymond noticing something in the numbers and me responding to what he noticed, something shifted very slightly. Not dramatically, not in a way that resolved 40 years of a particular dynamic, but in a way that suggested, for the first time, that the dynamic might not be entirely fixed. After the meeting, Raymond stayed behind. The other people who had attended filed out. He sat at the far end of the conference table and I sat at the near end, and the room was quiet in the way that conference rooms are quiet when the meeting is over. He said, "You're good at this." "I know," I said. He almost smiled at that. "Dad always said so," he said. "I didn't listen." "I know that too," I said. He looked at the table. I'm going to try to listen now, he said. I looked at my brother, at the 70-year-old man at the far end of the conference table, who had spent his life believing that being the eldest son was sufficient and who was beginning to understand, at 70, that it was not. That would be a start, I said. Collins Construction turned 60 years old in April. Earl had founded it in 1975. April of the following year marked 60 years of the company. He had started with 2 employees and a used truck, and the particular stubbornness of someone who has decided that a thing is going to happen. I organized the anniversary. Not elaborately. Earl would not have wanted elaborate. He had been a man who believed that the work was the celebration and that anything beyond the work was decoration. But something. A gathering of the people who had built the company alongside him. The 40 employees who showed up every day. The clients who had trusted Collins Construction with the projects that mattered most to them. The people from the community who had watched Earl Collins build something over 60 years and whose lives had been touched by the building. We held it on a Saturday afternoon at the company's main yard. Raymond helped organize it. That surprised me, not the helping, which I had begun to expect, but the quality of the helping. The attention he brought to the details. The care with which he tracked the list of people to be invited, cross-referencing it against Earl's old contact files to make sure nobody who mattered was missed. He knew things I had not expected him to know. Names of clients from the early years,